All right, Wolfpack Nation, it is officially August. It is time to start the real countdown for the beginning of 2024 in-state football season, y'all. It is time. We are going to be breaking down offenses and defense here today. And we're going to start off, obviously, with the offensive side. That's the thing that everybody is really just excited to kind of sink their teeth into. I think that this could be really kind of maybe a potential change in the guard, which we'll talk about here today, where, will the offense be the focal point of the team this year? We'll talk about that here today with our friend of the podcast, as always, Phillip Danford from Inside Pack Sports. We always love having him on. Excited to have him on once again to finally start to talk some football again. So, Phillip, welcome back to the show, man. Appreciate your time.
Hey, man. Appreciate you allowing me to come on, talk ball. Always like talking with you guys.
I appreciate it. Yeah, y'all. And again, if you haven't already, subscribed to the channel, make sure to go and do that. If that button's lighting up for you right now, make sure to hit that subscribe button, y'all. And if you are excited about in-state football, just like we are, make sure to give us a like as well. But Phillip, really jumping into it, I want to kind of talk a little bit about last season first and foremost here, as there's really one question that still kind of eats at me that I now that you've had time to really look at the season, think about the season, kind of let last season kind of murmur in your head a little bit. What do you think caused, because like heading into the news about Bradley Rosner coming to NC State, there was a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm behind him being like, okay, this can be the guy that can add a lot of height, add a lot of possibilities with Coach and I that he could use to his benefit. But it didn't really work out. I mean, 20 catches for just over 200 yards receiving, just never really was an impact player for us much at all. And pretty much once KC took over, Rosner was basically an afterthought. So do you think that Rosner not being a success at NC State compared to what he did at Rice, in hindsight, is a lot of just maybe we didn't use him properly, or just that he wasn't really necessarily the best fit with our offense? What are your thoughts on Rosner? That's the biggest question for me, because go ahead.
I think the biggest thing is just chance, right? What opportunity did we provide him, right? He comes in, right. Me and James Henderson over at IPS, right? I remember being out the first practice last year, and we both noticed, right? He was running at the back, right? He's with the fours, the threes, and you kind of thought, all right, I know I don't expect him to be right up front of the line of the receivers, but I would expect more opportunity. And I feel like getting buried early on and having to really work his way up the ladder to that degree, I think that stunted his growth a little bit. And then it feels like almost by the time he was in there, I feel like Armstrong kind of lost some confidence in in the receiver room and everything like that. I mean, that's just kind of, the skill talent wasn't there last year, right? I think there was very much of an overestimation of what we had from a skill talent perspective in-house from the prior year. So they didn't attack the portal, especially with the urgency that they did this year. And I think that was probably one of the biggest things, and one of the reasons, that offense just, really fell flat at times. When they picked it up, there were two key items to me when the offense picked up. It was obviously the emergence of KC, which is something I don't think anybody could foresee to that extent by any means. And then the other part was Armstrong's legs having to be such a driver for the offense. And once they finally melded those two, especially the last 4 games, then it kind of got into gear. But I mean, it took so long to get there, and they had to really weed through and say, hey, this doesn't work. And unfortunately, Rosner was a little bit in that pile where I think Armstrong had just lost faith in the skill group, and nothing was working on the outside unless it was a tap pass to KC or something easy underneath. So yeah. It's unfortunate, but I think there have been lessons learned. I think you look at the way NC State attacked the portal, especially at the receiver position this year. And that's not only saying going after big guys like Noah, who you had a little bit of an in with, right? A local kid you recruited hard out of high school, but even a Wesley Grimes, who, does he have the profile of a Noah? No, I don't think he does, but I think it's still a big upgrade in terms of what we have in terms of the profile of the receivers, even going out and getting him from a Wake Forest. So I think there were lessons learned for sure.
Well, that's why I was going to kind of ramble about a little bit, which I appreciate you jumping in on and stopping, Phillip. And I'll let you get in this next question here, Greg, or thought. But, that was kind of my big question was, that could be kind of looked at as a, kind of a little bit of a, I guess, a star on Doran a little bit, being like, well, you brought in Rosner and he went really downhill. So it's just like, if you're a transfer wide receiver, do you look and say being like, well, like, is that, a statement on the program? Is that a statement on the coaching staff? What is it? But obviously it seems that whatever that was, that obviously those worries were not really magnified because of how many transfer wide receivers we got this year. So go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I know you guys specifically talked about Rosner on your last podcast when you guys were breaking down, and you mentioned exactly what you had just mentioned. But is there a candidate that could potentially have that same problem this year? Because there is so much talent at the wide receiver. Because in today's age with the transfer portal, are these guys going to be patient enough? I see like an Anderson or a Jackson that could potentially not get a lot of reps, and then next year they just enter the portal because that's what kids do these days.
Yeah. I mean, there is always that chance, right?
Sure.
Now, I would say the first guy that actually comes to mind is Paylor. Just from the standpoint. Now, I think Paylor is going to get some opportunities in the special teams. But if we look at offensively, he was, if we want to talk about, right, like when they were doing receiver drills in the first practice, he was towards the back of the line, right? He's still learning. He's still coming along. And so, they had Casey in the slot. They had Coit behind him. He was kind of second string. Is Paylor a guy that I think they will definitively have plays for him. I think he will come in and he will get some plays. But is he going to get a ton of run offensively? It's going to take time for that to build. So for him, but then you get into the freshman guys, right? I mean, they brought in 5 freshman receivers, right? When we talk about Anderson and Paylor and Tank Boston and Zachary, and then, so yeah, not all those guys are going to play. I mean, that's just, there's only 11 guys on the field at a time.
And
right?
one football.
And so one football. And so, yeah, I could see that. I'll say at practice the other day, the first practice, and what we're allowed to see, right? It's a, hour and a half or so. We're out there to kind of watch. And Keenan Jackson was second behind Dakari Collins at one of the outside receiver spots. I didn't have any expectation. I had no idea. Could it be Anderson? Could it be somebody? But Keenan Jackson, and we've heard some really good things about him kind of in the background. So, I think out of the receivers, he might be a guy you kind of keep an eye on coming, late August here.
Yeah. Well, and especially too, I think with Paylor, it really stood out to me in the ACC road trip that it seemed like Anai made sure to really spotlight Jonathan Paylor when talking about the freshman and talking about his shiftiness and his explosiveness, his agility. And it's this year, I really do think that honestly, the biggest hurdle that the offense is going to have to go through is the ability to keep the culture, to keep the camaraderie at a high level throughout the season. As there's going to be times where the offense is going to be pushed with their backs against the wall for opportunities where players are going to say, well, I should get more touches, I should get more targets. And obviously, as you kind of saw, with any offense, especially with as many new names as we have, it's going to take a little bit of time at the very least to figure out what works, what's the best way for us to run this offense successfully. It's rare to really come out from the first play of the first game and have your top level offense ready to go that first play. It's going to take a little bit of time to figure it out. So that's kind of my biggest thing, and that's my biggest hope. And that's why I really look at Joker Phillips saying, hey, we've had a lot of questions about Joker Phillips as a coach before. I think that's going to be his biggest thing, keeping that receiver locker room focused and locked in, saying we're here to win a championship, boys. You'll get your time, you'll get your piece, you keep doing your work, but then guys, we're here to win a championship. Simple as that. And so that's my biggest, and that's my also biggest hope too, is that, and my biggest, I guess, driver is that Doran's always done a great job of focusing on, first and foremost, when I go after a guy, do they fit the culture? Do they fit? Are they the kind of person that I want to be in my locker room? First and foremost, if they don't meet that, Doran's not going after him. He's made that very, very clear by the guys that he's gone after before. And so that's my thing is I'm sitting here saying, well, going off of that, I'm assuming he would not have brought in Noah Rogers. He would not have brought in Wesley Grimes unless they were, first of all, guys that focused on the team and the success of the team first and foremost. That's the hope. But now, again, I understand that Noah Rogers, he's a guy that I mean, you guys have talked about it. We talk about it. That guy could easily be the most talented wide receiver we have, and it's not even a question, honestly. But he just doesn't have a lot of experience. So that's
all it is. I mean, he just hasn't been between the lines at the college level, but I mean, yeah, he absolutely looks. I mean, I'd say physically the other day, we got the chance to be down the sideline and kind of watch. I mean, it is a well put together team. The freshmen stand out. I mean, and these are guys. Paylor, Paylor just got here a few weeks ago. Yep. He is so rocked up. His arms, I would love to have arms like that. It is insane. I mean, he's one of those guys. I know he's not the biggest guy, but he gets off the bus early, right? I mean, because he just looks so good. Duke Scott at running back. I mean, I don't know if I've seen him.
Right? Duke Johnson,
Scott.
Right?
No, Duke Scott. He's right.
Yeah. Oh, Duke Johnson. Yeah.
No, yeah.
Remember Nye? Yeah, that's
yeah,
man. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
His legs. If fans haven't had the opportunity to see it, man, tree trunks. Like, it is wild. Like, you don't look at that and say that kid just got out of high school. Like, it is wild. It's very reminiscent. James made the comment to me the other day. Kind of looks a little like Tony Baker back in the day. If you guys remember him, that was back 2004 or 5, somewhere around there. But
Touchdown
same
Baker.
kind of build, man. Yeah. I mean, they look good. The receivers, Anderson and Jackson, they're tall, they're lanky. I mean, they've got that size that, you're ideally looking for at some of these, X positions on the outside. So, man, it's a really well put together class.
Yeah, I just looking at some of, I know his tape, looking from him from freshman year to this year, he's really bulked up a lot. He looks like a dude that you could just slot right in there and be like, okay, we're good, let's roll. I guess we can jump into the offensive line, because that seems to be, if this team has a question mark, it probably would be at offensive line, just because I feel we've brought in so much talent, and I know we brought in Zeke at center, but the offensive line I don't think is getting enough credit and enough talk about, because of, they're being kind of overshadowed by like I said, just the NIL portal guys that we brought in.
Yeah, no, I agree. The offensive line probably hasn't been discussed enough. If we even go back to last year, the offensive line is usually an easy target for criticism. And I think part of that is there's not a full, true understanding of what their role is, right? And conceptually, like when you run a play, what are they supposed to do? I mean, as much as we talk about the offensive line, I think a change in running back is really going to help that group, and I think it's going to kind of stand out to the fans of the running game. I expect to be better this year, but you're talking about a group that returns, you could say by the end of the year, right? They return 4 or 5 starters. Now, you bring in Zeke Correll, high-end center from Notre Dame. I had the opportunity to do a film room with him that, as we're recording this, it hadn't come out yet publicly, but I'll tell you this, Zeke Correll is one of the smartest players I've ever had a chance to talk to. It was fascinating. Him getting into detail. That dude loves to talk ball. I'll tell you this, he's going to be a heck of a radio podcaster one day, man. He can talk ball, and he's got a great attitude towards it. But I think he's going to be a massive asset. The left guard positions we mentioned earlier, it's probably the one spot where there is some true competition, right? Whether you've got Anthony Carter, right? McCabe coming in, right? This is a former walk-on, but he's a big boy, man. He looks like he fits that part. And then obviously we brought up Kamen Smith earlier. Now, the other day at the initial practice, McCabe was running with the ones, and Carter seemed to kind of be a bit of the swing guy. And when I say that, because they were working on deuce blocks, right zone, so guard tackle working up to the second level, and I saw Carter actually work left and right side. So that kind of gave me an indication that, all right, they might be looking at McCabe one, and then Carter's kind of the swing guy right now. But of course, it's just first practice. That could change in a heartbeat. But this is a group, I'll tell you, again, a little maligned last year from the fan base for some of the folks in the fan base. But they only gave up 1.85 sacks a game, which for a Robert and I offense, that was actually one of my concerns coming in, is that Robert and I offenses have actually been kind of sack heavy over the years, right? Long, very, they do full field progressions, right? Quarterback's got to hold the ball a long time. So they tended to give up more sacks than the average team. They didn't last year, 1.85. And so that was a really good pressure rate, was around 20%, not a bad number by any means. And so, especially from that perspective, it was not bad. Actually, I thought the biggest issues in pass protection were the peripheral guys. It was the running back position. It was the tight ends, not necessarily the offensive line. So I think that's a key to kind of watch this year. Does that improve? And the other thing with the run game, one of my critiques, I would say, is last year in the run game, we didn't really establish, in my opinion, what is our base run, right? What is our bread and butter? It felt like we kind of did a little bit of everything, but let's say push comes to shove and you've got one play call in the run game. What are you going to? And I'm not sure I could tell you what it would be because it kind of did a little bit of everything, right?
It felt like Armstrong.
Yeah, it's going to be Armstrong. Is it going to be a gap scheme run? Is it going to be a zone run? Is it going to be G down? Is it right? And so I think that was maybe one of my criticisms. I think that's where you saw maybe the coaching staff searching a lot last year. Like, what do we do well in terms of our blocking scheme up front? I believe with this group, and one of my conversations with Zeke, I think they're going to start leaning a little bit more on the zone run game and the outside zone. And, you know, for fans not familiar, just think back to, now I don't know if it'll be to this extent, but when Drinkwitz was the offensive coordinator and Ledford was the O-line coach, that was one of the heaviest outside zone teams in the country, right? And that was their bread and butter. You knew what they wanted to do, and then they had all the play actions and boots that came off of it. I kind of, you know, I'm looking to see, right, do we get a little bit more of that this year? And now we actually have that base run.
Before we continue, I want to take a quick second to tell you about our sponsor, Flatlands Jessup Insurance Group, that has your whole world covered, with agents in 5 offices throughout Eastern North Carolina to help you decide how much coverage you need. Offering policies for home and auto, recreational vehicles, commercial, crop, health, life, and employee benefits. They are able to combine options to find a comprehensive solution that works for you. Flatlands Jessup protects the things you love so you can spend less time worrying and more time enjoying them. Find them on Facebook and Instagram at Flatlands Jessup. You can also visit their webpage at www.flatlandsjessup.com. So please make sure to go and check them out. Well, and especially with Zeke Correll, I mean, like, you know, I kind of think back to my last year at State, and we also brought in a graduate center that made a huge impact in Joe Selfo, transferred from South Alabama, that was pretty highly regarded, you know, with his skill level and how he was by far the best player that South Alabama had. Well, now with Zeke Correll, you know, this is a guy that's coming from an organization that is widely considered probably one of the top 5 offensive line producers in the whole country, you know, and has definitely a case for offensive line U, in my opinion. And so, you know, I think it's honestly a home run. Now the question which I do want to ask you, Phillip, before I want to jump on over to some running backs and finish up talking about Grayson a little bit here, is what would you say is the most important offensive line position? Would you say it's the center or the weak side tackle?
No, you know, if you look at the NFL, usually the backside, the left tackle, usually those are the highest paid guys. Mm-hmm. I put a lot of stock in the center personally. I do, right? You have offenses, and I expect this to be an offense, especially with Zeke Correll's knowledge base. I fully expect he will be highly involved in changing protections and doing all that kind of stuff. Right. Mm-hmm. If things change from your initial look to your second look, right, they audible, they change, right? Can you re-mic? I mean, all that kind of stuff. I think a lot of the center position personally. So, I mean, to me, Zeke Correll was a massive addition, maybe a little bit underrated in terms of the fan base, which offensive line can be. I get it. Left tackle being the sexiest of the 5, if you want to say that. But Belton will play a massive piece. I will say that too. I was actually looking at my run game charting the other night, and, you know, there is a definite pickup when you run behind Anthony Belton on the left side. That was actually our most successful runs. It was outside left and outside B and C gaps. So you can tell, you know, Belton is a bit of a mauler in the run game, and he's going to need to play like that, especially if he's going to live up to, hey, I've heard people talking about potential first round, second round. You know, we never know how it's going to look next April, but I mean, he has the potential, all right? He's on scouts' radars. He has the potential to play into that. So he will be a massive piece to the offense this year.
Yeah, it was kind of a little bit of a trick question there, Phil, for sure. But I mean, I was curious for sure. I think from knowing you enough and knowing, about how much you look at that, probably the center would be the one. But if you're NC State, you're really feeling really good. And I think this is why, honestly, State fans should feel a little bit better. That arguably the two most important positions on the offensive line, center and weak side tackle, you have one of the best in, one of the top 10, top 15 best in the country. I mean, at those positions, which is a great problem to have for sure. But Greg, anything? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to just kind of put a bow on the offensive line. I think you're going to see just another step up in progression because this is Coach 2J's second year, and he's got guys that fit his system, his schemes. They've been together now just another year, and I think if anything, the offensive line has to have that cohesion because they rely on each other to make sure that they have each other's back. If someone's stunting or doing something on the D line, that they need to be able to communicate. And I think just having that extra year together, they know how each other's style is as well, and what the weaknesses and strengths are.
Absolutely. The other thing I'll add, sorry, real quick.
Go ahead.
Another reason why I really put a lot of importance to center in terms of pass protection. I think pocket depth is easily as important, if not more important than, right? We always think about edge rushers coming around, getting the blind side. But to me, really what disrupts quarterbacks more than that is when you take away their depth and their ability to step up in the pocket, right? And now you're forcing them to move laterally. I mean, if you can keep depth, right? Give that quarterback the full ability to hitch up. Maybe he's got to hitch up because he's making multiple reads in his progression, right? But to me, that's a big piece. That's why, edge rushers can be nice, but you can potentially run them around. Quarterback steps up and he's still in a very clean pocket. You push the center of the pocket, it's dirty. Guys got to get quarterback's off his spot now, and I think you've really disrupted the play. So, when we get to defense, right? Brandon Cleveland's so good at that, stuff like that. But on the offensive side, having a Zeke Correll, I mean, I think that's where it's really going to pay dividends.
Yeah.
Do you think he's real quick? I'm sorry. Do you think he's a step up from Mac last year?
I mean, personally, I do. Dylan McMahon, right? It's been a love-hate relationship, or at least analysis, especially on my end. I've had times where I thought, this guy's really developing into something like really good, and other times I'm like, man, I'm not seeing it right now. And so for me, I've gone back and forth on my evaluation of him. Obviously, the NFL, he did well in the East-West game. Was it the Shrine game I think he played in? I know he kind of popped up on some radars there. He's a good player, but I definitely think Zeke's a step up from my end.
Oh, I would much more easily say that for sure, but and that's not a hate towards McMahon, but just
no.
I mean, but Zeke, I mean, God, I mean, again, just look what he did at Notre Dame and look where he came from, look where he was successful. But the last thing, I mean, we haven't even brought up the name Dawson Jaramillo, but I just have a hard time thinking that guy's not going to get involved somehow, being that he's a graduate, being that he is transferred from Oregon. He's a guy that's looking to go out with a bang. You know what I mean? He's got one more year left, and he missed all of last year because of an injury. So I'm assuming he didn't sit on his hands for 365 days and is going to sit on his hands for the last 365. No, he's gonna find a way to get in there. I'm expecting, but I want to talk a little bit more about running backs, and then we'll jump into Grayson here. But I know that, looking back at last year, that for you guys at IPS, and else too with us, and it was just screaming that there was opportunities missed last year just because from a talent level wise, we just weren't getting what we needed at the running back side. And that could go to, again, the skill level, the measurables, aka the height, things like that, but just to find creases and get north to south, ASAP, go get 4 to 5 yards. But now this year you bring in Jordan Waters, who's all ACC guy. You also bring in a guy like Hollywood Smothers, who's a very proven guy that we went after, just like you said, kind of like with Noah Rogers, transfer out of Oklahoma. But then a guy like Kendrick Raphael that I think a lot of guys kind of forget about at times. But I mean, he's a guy that averaged just under 5 yards a carry last year. Really had some impressive plays like the hurdle. I think it was against Morsell, which was super impressive to say the least. So, I mean, and then again, you got Duke Johnson, back there as well. That's going to be super impressive. So, I mean, I'm feeling really, really good in terms of the running game level combined with what you're going to have run blocking as well.
You're going to have me calling him Duke Johnson.
I'm telling you, dude, I would not be surprised, honestly, if literally country, literally actually made a nameplate that said Duke Johnson, actually put it over with Duke Johnson. I guarantee you that they're holding on to that joke. Guaranteed. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the running back position, I think, is very critical for this offense. They need to be well-rounded. Last year, they left a lot on the table. I mean, they just did, and it was a bit of a concern as we came out of the preseason last year, and it kind of manifested itself. I mean, they didn't go after anybody in the portal, right? They ran with Jordan Houston and Michael Allen, Delbert Mims, and all them. And, you just saw on the film that, runs would be blocked up. And I'm not saying every run, but there would be a good amount of runs blocked up better than what the end result was. And it's whether it's not hitting the right hole or not being able to make something happen at the second level. I think that's going to be one of the big things that I think you see from Jordan Waters. It's, all right, can you get what's blocked up? But then can you get something extra at the end, right? Can you make a guy miss? Can you run a guy over, right? Can you turn a 4-yard gain into a 6 or 7 yard gain, right? By falling forward, right? That big forward lean. And, we see that consistently in Jordan Waters' tapes, who I very much think will be, running back 1A when we come out against Western Carolina. He's a guy that when we look at his stats at Duke, his highest yards per carry were actually in the third and fourth quarters of games, right? He's a guy that got better as games progressed while in his career at Duke. He's a guy that's very scheme agnostic in the sense that we saw him run a lot of gap schemes. I thought he was an excellent gap scheme runner, but he also had some massive zone runs. There's a big one he broke out against Clemson, right? Nice little zone run inside, and he bounces it once he hits the second level. And I think that's what we were missing last year, right? I always go back to there's an old Urban Meyer quote that stuck in my head for many years, right? And it's, the coaches and the scheme, we can get you through the first level, but it's the recruiting that gets you past the second and third levels as a running back, right? And it felt like that's what we were missing last year, right? Yeah, we can get you that 3 or 4 yards based on the scheme, but how do we get to that 8, 9 yards? How do we get explosive runs? And that's where recruiting comes in. And it felt like it was lacking last year. Like this group just didn't have that extra gear that was needed. And so, yes, you're very hopeful, Jordan Waters. Kendrick Raphael, I told him, so we're actually going to have a film room with Kendrick Raphael coming out, I think, this week. And I will tell you this, me and him kind of talking about the steps and like when you make your decision on zone runs and all that, he was very detailed. I was very impressed with Kendrick Raphael. He's a guy I had no expectation. I told him that. I was like, I had no expectation for you coming as a freshman. I was like, you greatly surpassed what I was thinking. And, I think he'll be kind of the 1B to start the season. A little bit overlooked, I believe, right now. I know everybody's excited about the transfers. I think Raphael will give you some good stuff. And then you've kind of got like a guy like a Hollywood Smothers, who I very much view as kind of that third down scat back, but kind of that home run hitter. I mean, he's quick. When you watch his feet, man, it is quick. And obviously Duke Scott, right? We talked about him, I think, early on. I think you're talking about a short yardage runner, somewhat in the Delbert Mims, role, but I think he can be an upgrade from what Delbert Mims provided. And that's not a knock on Delbert. I mean, I know that can come off like that, but I think a lot of, the potential Duke Scott carries right now. So, yeah, I'm looking for a big, big increase in the run game. And they need to be, I'll say this too, the offense as a whole needs to be more in sync. And I'll throw it out like this. The run game was subpar last year. And that was subpar. And then that ended up taking away from the play action game. It's wild when you actually look at the statistics of play action. NC State only ran run action, right? So there was play action, RPO on 17% of snaps last year. But those snaps were insanely higher in terms of EPA and yards per attempt and everything else But it's like the offense never got in sync. The run game never became the threat it should be, which meant that we never really had the play action and the RPOs that we thought we should have. And then we ended up more in the drop back game, which NC State actually had a negative EPA in terms of just true drop back passing. So it's kind of all got to come together a little more this year. Last year was just too bifurcated in the sense that, you had the pass game, you had the run game. They didn't meld, in my opinion. This year, I'm hoping they kind of come together.
Yeah. It kind of what I was trying to get at earlier was like that cohesion just never was there. It just felt like, and I think some of it, and it's always going to be opponent based of what the opponent gives you and the looks that you get. But it never felt that we just had consistency from game to game. Like we would do one thing really well from one game, and then we would regress the next game. I just think with these skill sets that this is year 2 of Anai, and I think he's going to, again, like I said, kind of with the offensive line, I think you're starting to see that you've got the people that he wants to run his system. Just getting back to Duke real quick, I just come away so impressed by him. You mentioned the Dilbert comparison. I just think he's going to be a much faster version. And again, Dilbert was a bruiser. I mean, there's no doubt. He would just run dudes over, but he didn't have the lateral movement that I see with Duke. He seems much more fluid. Would that be pretty much a fair assessment?
I absolutely think that's fair, right? And I think you also, even from a broader sense, you can say, right, I think Delbert was a bit of a one-dimensional player, right? He kind of had that downhill run game, and that's what he had. And frankly, I think if you can look at other positions and you see a lot of one-dimensional players, I think as a whole, the offense, I think you're getting guys that can do more than one thing now, right? I think you're getting better pass protection from the running backs. I think you're getting a tight end group that will be able to not only go out and catch passes, but also run block, right? I think there's a lot more of a multi-dimensional facet to a lot of the new players that State's brought in. Delbert Mims versus Duke Scott potentially being one of the examples.
Yeah. You just mentioned tight ends real quick. I just want to, is Juice going to get some action? Because it just feels like with what we brought in, he's getting pushed down the depth chart. Maybe I'm seeing that wrong, but it just, they were so high on him last year. Just kind of give me your thoughts there.
Yeah, man. And I could be, put blame on me. I'm one who kind of forgot about Juice Farine, to be honest with you, a little bit in my kind of preseason, just because, I've had the opportunity to do some work with Justin Jolie. I think a lot of him as a player. Dante Daniels, I will tell you from a in-person standpoint, he jumps,
massive.
Man. Like, he is huge. Like, you look at that and you're like, all right, we're going to be better up front with Dante Daniels right there. Like, I feel very confident about that. And so it's easy to leave Vereen out, right? Because Vereen, if we want to talk, I just mentioned one-dimensional players. He was a tight end last year that could not block to save his life. He was basically just a big receiver. But he was also a big receiver that had the biggest delta on the team in the sense of pass attempts versus catches. I think they threw the ball to him 14 times last year. He still only had 3-4 catches, and he had just as many drops. It was just an inconsistent, freshman year coming from Juice Farine. But I will say he's a guy that I candidly had my eye on. Transfer portal, was this a guy that would look to go? He didn't, and he came back. I saw him the other day. It actually stood out to me. He looks bigger, right? He looks like the weight room has made a difference this past offseason. And he was in there, kind of just working on his three-point stance, working on, his blocking and his release out of a three-point stance. And so, again, I think that's where he's really going to need to, show, can he be that two-dimensional guy and be more, a bigger player in this offense? Now, when they were running, pass drills, he was second in line behind Justin Jolie in terms of pass drills. So I do think he'll get some run. I don't think he's completely forgotten on the roster by any means. But I do think he's got to build out his game, right? He can't just be a one-dimensional player.
No, agreed. So, and then last position we want to talk a little bit about, and believe it or not, we probably won't even actually talk about the guy that's in the one, because obviously there's been so much talk about Grayson McCall. You know what you're getting from him for sure. And so that's not really the question for me, or I think even honestly the question that's on people's heads. It's more, gosh forbid, knocking on wood over here, history goes back to repeat itself once again, and he's out for a game or two or whatever that may be. Now you're looking at us CJ Bailey as the presumptive, almost without a doubt, guy that's going to take over. And I honestly, because I like sitting here, if I'd have told you Phillip, or any of us 5 months ago that CJ Bailey was going to be our second string quarterback without a shot of a doubt heading into fall camp, you said we would have all said that's crazy. There's no way that you're going to rely on a true freshman quarterback to be your backup heading into the season with this much weight on it. But, from what you saw at the spring game, from what the coaches have said about him, well, it's true. I think also too, knowing how the offense is going to be, knowing how many weapons you have, and knowing with this quarterback, you don't have to have that guy that's doing it all himself like a Brian Armstrong. But also too, I think a little bit of it as well is what the market and how much it costs to bring in quarterbacks from an NIL side to be a guy that is hopefully you don't need him the whole year at the best case scenario. I think all of those things really together kind of makes sense to me of why, let's go with CJ Bailey. This is a guy that started games at a very, very high level nationally in high school. Even played some games on ESPN2 even, like he's this isn't a guy that, that I necessarily worry about that the moment's just going to be way too much for him. Because, he's played with really high talent at the high school level. So Phillip, just to kind of wrap up this piece here, kind of give me your thoughts. How surprised are you that CJ Bailey right now is the cleared out backup quarterback to Grayson McCall?
No, I will say I was one that thought they should have brought in a quarterback, right?
Yes.
I did.
We all did.
Especially early on. And I'll say this. I'm still not on the side that they shouldn't have. Like, I could see it the other day out there. Like, yeah, there's space for one more guy. I'll say this. So Henderson, he was keeping an eye on the portal. A guy like Emmett Moorhead. You guys remember Emmett Moorhead?
Mm-hmm.
It was late in the spring. He still wasn't on a roster. He was still in the transfer portal. There were still some dudes out there that you might be able to, convince late to bring in. Might not even have to pay NIL, right?
Yeah.
So there were some dudes. There's a lot of players in that portal. But, in terms of Bailey, yeah, he is the clear-cut number 2 right now. And that obviously is the plan, right? It's him and then this Lex Thomas. Quite the dichotomy when they stand next to each other, right? That's 2 different body types completely. CJ is all of 6'6". And now the big thing you look at, right, when we were out there in the spring, he was skinny. You felt like you could see his bones at times, but he's put on weight. You can tell he's put on weight. He looked great in the spring game. I think that's been one of the biggest revelations to come out of, in this offseason. I didn't know what to expect from him. This is a guy coming, you mentioned it. He came from a high-end high school program, but he came in and his receivers were Jeremiah Smith, who some people are talking about as this insane freshman at Ohio State, right? He had these other big receivers. He had another guy. I forget where he went.
He went to Miami. I know.
Yeah. So, it was a team that was stacked, right? And that makes evaluation very difficult, right? Because you might look at the quarterback and say, well, how much of that was his receivers, right? If we think Jeremiah Smith is going to be a potential All-American, how much was that Bailey? How much was that him, right? So I think the evaluation could be a little bit tricky with a guy like that. But he's come out. I had no expectation. I had no idea what to expect. And he surprises. This is a guy who has a really good arm. Yes, he's 6'6". He doesn't throw from way over the top, though. He has different arm angles. And it was really his mobility that kind of jumped out, right? Obviously, he had that massive, big run early in the first quarter in the spring game. But other stuff, in just terms of navigating the pocket, right? He's not going to have any issue seeing over the offensive line. He should be able to see seams and holes. So, do I feel completely at ease if McCall happens to go down and he's in there? No, because we don't truly, know how a guy's going to react until the bullets fly. But I feel much better than I did in January and February when it was like, man, I'm not sure we're going to bring in another guy. Is this the right move? So it'll be fascinating. But the staff does think a lot of him. So, I think for the most part, they've shown to be very good evaluators. And so we're gonna lean on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, beautiful. Well, with that being said, Wolfpack Nation, that was a pretty quick overall, but preview on the offensive side for sure. But again, it's definitely going to be a side of the football that should probably be arguably Dorn's best offense that we've had. I mean, now again, that's arguable to the 2017 offense with Kelvin Harmon, Jacoby Myers, Stephon Lewis, Naeem Hines, Jay Sam, which is a pretty stacked offense. But again, we'll see. Excited to see it here against Western Carolina. So again, y'all, if you haven't already, make sure to follow Phillip Danford on social media. Make sure to go give Inside Pack Sports some love for sure, as they got some exciting content coming out soon. And then for us, again, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If that button's lighting up for you right now, make sure to smash it, baby. And then also make sure to give us a follow at Tuffy Talk now, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And make sure to leave a like. And if you're listening to this on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. And thank you all so much. We'll see y'all for part 2 as we break down the defense, baby. Go Pack.